Welcome to this retrospective slash review for Final Fantasy IV, the After Years, specifically the 3D remake that's available on Steam, iOS, and Android. I played the Steam release, as you can see here. Basically, I want to go ahead and do a quick apology. As soon as I completed my playthrough of this, I traveled away from my residence for about a week. So it's taken me a little while to get this review up, but they say better late than never, right? So anyway, just going to give you a quick rundown of my thoughts, and I try to organize things a little bit better, so I've written down what I believe are some of the positives and negatives of this game. And so I'm just going to kind of just jump right into that, and also briefly we'll mention some of my thoughts about playing this on Linux. But anyway, so let me start off with the first pros for the game. I will start off with the episodic format, which I believe is both a positive and a negative. In my opinion, I do feel like the episodic release for the game was actually pretty good. I enjoyed playing the separate episodes throughout the game, getting different perspectives from different characters, and also being introduced to new characters and whatnot slowly as the game progressed. Now, I know originally that this was done because I guess they were trying to milk things on the WiiWare release of things as far as North America is concerned. I think maybe originally in Japan this was originally released on mobile phones or something, but I'm not entirely familiar with that. But as far as those of us in North America are concerned, and probably the rest of the world as well, this originally came out on the Wii in an episodic format. So maybe that was kind of Square trying to milk things, but at the end of the day, I actually do enjoy the way the episodes played out pretty much for the most part. I think that was a neat addition, really. Graphics and music for me, obviously the music being Final Fantasy IV and that iconic, at least iconic in my view, soundtrack is still intact, and I think it's just amazing. So you can't say anything negative as far as I'm concerned about the music. I think the music's great. The graphics, I actually do like the graphics in this game. I know that's one of those things that for some people they can take it or leave it. But ever since I played, Final Fantasy 3 and the Final Fantasy IV 3D remakes, both of them, and then this one, which is in basically the same art style to me, it's good. I like it. I don't have any problem with the art style in the game, and as far as I'm concerned, I do like the graphics. Now, I know a lot of old school people, even myself basically, who grew up with the original Final Fantasy IV, or as we knew it, Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo, may have a nostalgic or preference for the pixel art. And so I can understand where that sentiment comes from. But at the end of the day, well, first of all, if you play this on Steam, there is no pixel art version of the game. The pixel remasters only came out for all the mainline Final Fantasy 1 through 6. So there is no pixel remake of this game. So this is the only option you have. And so with the 3D remakes of the game, it kind of flows in line with playing it this way. So, like I said, some people may not like it. I personally am a fan of the artwork, so it doesn't bother me. But I can understand where some people come from as far as that is concerned. Now, the story of the game, I guess some people seem to think this game, in their opinion, feels like a retread of Final Fantasy IV, and I honestly don't see that at all. I think the game itself is... The story is fairly original. About the only thing I can say about this game that is exactly like Final Fantasy IV is the fact that, as always, you seem to lose all the crystals no matter what you do, basically. So other than that aspect, the game itself is actually the story is actually pretty good. Um, if there's anything I would criticize it on, is that there are some loose plot threads dangling that never really seem to get answered. For instance, the Lunarian story with Golbez and Fasolia, that whole interaction with Fasolia, what happened to him? You never know. I mean, you can basically assume that Fasolia died fighting Zeromus' malice, but that's all you can really do at the end of the day is assume. You don't know. And so that dangling plot thread, I could see that being a bit of a negative, but at the end of the day, I think story-wise, the game itself has a pretty good story. I'd say it's above average. It's not the best Final Fantasy story, and I don't think it's as good as the original Final Fantasy IV, but to say it's a retread, I don't see it. It stands on its own as a news story, and some of the new characters that are introduced are actually pretty decent. So I think it's pretty good as far as the story is concerned. Especially if you are a fan of the original Final Fantasy IV, I think getting to come back and play this again, you're going to enjoy playing it again. So that's my own personal opinion. Some people may not like the story, but I think it stands on its own. Anyway, some more advantages I'd like to talk about for this game is the fact that when you get to the final episode, another neat aspect of the episodic format is the fact that you're able to import all your saves from the old episodes into the final episode, and I feel that was kind of pretty neat, from like someone who's played some old computer RPGs where you're able to import your old save into the new game, and I felt that was a neat addition as far as this is concerned. It just kind of reminded me of some of those old CRPGs from back in the day. I don't know if that was their intention when they set it up, but that's how it felt to me, and I actually enjoyed it. But once you get to the final episode and you get past the initial, few hours or so, when you finally have your entire party assembled again and ready to go, one of the neat aspects of this game, at least compared to the original Final Fantasy IV, is that you can customize your party to suit your needs. The party I went with was actually one of the guides I was following. It was one of the recommended setups, and at the end of the day, I kind of wanted to do it anyway because I liked Golbez as a character, and so I wanted him to be in my final party anyway. But there were definitely other variations you could have taken on the final group, and it's really up to preference. I mean, for me personally, my favorite character from an actual character perspective is Palom, and I could have really put together a good group with, say, him and Leonora in the group, but I decided to go with Rosa this time around. But, that option to use whatever setup you want for the final party is actually a really great feature of this game, at least compared to the original Final Fantasy IV. The bands function, where you get all these different ultra attacks, if you will, the bands are actually really nice. I think it's a very neat addition, and something about this release of the game compared to the original Wii release that does need to be mentioned here is the fact that it's a lot easier for you to get the bands in this game as compared to, say, the Wii release, because you learn the bands automatically, and it kind of just lists them for you. So, like, actually, while I'm sitting here playing this, let me pull up the menu real quick, and we'll just click on Rydia here. So you can see that you've maxed the level or what you don't have. Like for this one right here, you realize you have to have these 4 characters in the party to learn this Call Me Queen band. And you have to have these 3 to get this one. So it tells you in this version of the game what you need to do to get all the bands. Now, obviously, there are a lot of them, and from a perspective of grinding, that's one of the things that I'm coming back to do, obviously, after completing the game. But that's a very good feature in this version of the game, is the fact that it really is not that difficult to unlock a lot of the bands compared to the original release, and it's almost automatic for the most part. Some of the characters originally in the game could actually get lost or die and not make it to the final story. That has also been remedied in this version of the game, so that you don't have to worry about certain characters not being in the final episode. The only character that you can theoretically lose and that's actually near the very end of the game, is Golbez. Other than Golbez, there's no one that can actually be lost in this game. And that's actually a pretty good aspect, I think, basically. From an achievement perspective, one of the nice things about this game is you don't have to play the same story 3 times in a row to basically get all of the achievements for the game. Now, it's not to mention that there won't be a lot of grinding in the game, because there's a lot of grinding in this game, to say the least. But from a story perspective, you're not sitting there doing the same story over and over again just to try and get, one achievement. Like in the original Final Fantasy IV, that would be Protobabble, where you really had to play it 3 times the whole game just to have a shot at Protobabble. So from that perspective, I think that's actually a really good change that they did here for this game. So that is a pro in my opinion. Linux performance, I do want to mention this as a positive as well. The fact that I believe the Linux performance for this game is near flawless. And I say near because I don't know if there's one technical issue. I don't know if that was specific to Linux or if it's just something that I happen to not know because playing it on Windows and whatnot. It may be present in Windows, and I just never experienced it here because I've never played it on Windows. So I don't know if it's a Linux issue or what that is, but basically, well, I'll go ahead and mention that negative right now then basically. And that is that sometimes the music will just completely and totally stop in the game. And I don't know if that's a Proton issue or if that's, it was there originally. So that's definitely a technical glitch. It's a fairly minor negative, but it does warrant mentioning, basically. So that may be a Linux issue, or it may just be, overall something. So other than that, playing this on Linux was about as easy as you could possibly get. Just use the latest stable Proton. You don't even have to use experimental, and everything just works. Music, whatnot. It just works. Okay, hopefully this isn't a abrupt stop of the game, but basically, let me get into the negatives of the game now. But I will point out real quick this middle room right here. I'm actually trying to get a purple tail, and I ran across an enemy that drops it, and kind of tough. So it's kind of hard for me to focus on a review and fight that guy at the same time. So I'm just going to avoid that room for now. But anyway, the first negative I'd like to talk about, other than the music issue, is basically the episodic format. The episodic format has one big drawback to it, and that's the fact that you do spend a lot of time in the early episodes, or let me take that back. Ideally, you spend a lot of time in the early episodes before getting to the final episode of the game. And the reason I say ideally is because if you try to come back to the episodes later, basically you leave a lot of experience just sitting there lying on the table. Because mostly what you want to do with the early episodes is complete the bestiary on all of them. And if you just come back to do it later, then basically your characters aren't going to be as strong when you import them into the final episode of the game. So it really does encourage you to play through the final episode, or excuse me, the previous episodes completely before you get there, and that really does drag out the story time significantly. Another aspect of the episodic layout that I really didn't like is the fact that each episode has its own bestiary, and that just seems like a weird step back, really. So if I've unlocked, we'll just say, Cockatrice on one episode, I still got to find that one, that enemy in other episodes, even though I've already beat it, to complete the bestiary for that episode. And I feel that's like a lot of unnecessary repeat work for stuff you've already done. So that's definitely a negative on the episodic format, in my opinion. And that does lead me into perhaps the second biggest negative of the game, and that is just the amount of time it takes to play through the game. Just me playing through the original episodes, all before getting to the final episode, I spent quite literally at least twice as much time. I spent at least twice as much time playing through the original episodes as I did through my first playthrough of Final Fantasy IV back in the day. So that was that was a bit of a time sink just there alone. But then in the final episode, when you get to the final dungeon, they just string it along for a very long time, and that final dungeon, it just keeps going and going and going, and not in a good way. It's just like you feel like, can we just get this over with and done, please? Because you're just kind of dragging it out, and it just wasn't dragged out in a good manner as far as I feel. It was just way too long. You got the lunar subterrane, then you've got the depths, and that whole final in-game sequence. My goodness, that took forever. I mean, that's why my video for it was over an hour long, is because that's how long it went on. It just kept going and going and going, and it just seemed just unnecessarily long. And that would be my the second biggest, I would say, complaint for the game as far as negatives are concerned, or just the amount of time you spent on it. I probably put about roughly 75 hours into the game. Got, I believe, 39 out of 50 achievements playing through it the first time. And that, I would say, roughly around 75 hours, which is probably about 3 times as long as it took me to complete Final Fantasy IV initially. So it definitely takes a very long time, and that doesn't really add to the story, in my opinion, at least. So definitely too drawn out, for sure. But that is not the biggest negative I have with the game. The biggest negative I have with the game is the fact that the UI changes that were done in this game, either changes or omissions may be the best way of saying it, because it seems like the user interface has taken such a huge step back from the original Final Fantasy IV 3D remake, I should say. The 3D remake had this nice feature where you could go in there, you could set up your abilities, which they don't have the abilities and whatnot that you have in Final Fantasy IV here. So, well, I mean, you do have the abilities, but you can't assign abilities to auto battle functions. And that is, I mean, one of the biggest omissions that I can think of by far in this game is the fact that why can't I basically set up my attacks or whatnot? It's just kind of baffling, really, when you get right down to it, why you can't set up your auto battle to be anything other than attack. And it definitely slows things down substantially when playing the game. And there is a lot of grinding to be done in this game, and the thing that makes the grinding take that much longer is the fact that you can't really change your auto battle layout. And I think that's just a huge omission, missed opportunity, whatever you want to call it, that I really wish they hadn't done in this game. But, you know, it is what it is, basically, I suppose, for lack of a better word. But it just a huge step back, in my opinion. The other thing, probably tying in with that, using abilities things, is like using items. The item interface for like using like wands and stuff, it's so clunky and untenable. I don't know why anyone would actually even try to do it. It just, for lack of a better word, just kind of sucks. So the user interface, compared to the 3D remake of Final Fantasy IV on Steam at least, it's taken a huge step back, in my opinion, in this game. And it's just the biggest negative by far in this game. It's just the downgrade to the user interface. And that's completely how I feel about it. It's definitely a downgrade. Let me drop some fire on these guys real quick. Oh yeah, forgot. Just because. Let's see here. There are a lot of new characters in the game that I did mention that is kind of interesting. But of those new characters, a lot of them are just kind of useless. The two that well, there's a lot of them actually. I think basically the two dolls, Kalka and Brenna, and I think Harley are the two obvious, or the three obvious, excuse me, characters that are just the most useless. The ninjas for Edge, they're kind of useless too, in the fact that each one is focused on a specific element, and ninjutsu itself is not very powerful anyway. It's never really been very powerful, and even the original Final Fantasy IV. So it just feels like, in my opinion, like they're kind of like bargain basement versions of Edge, and that's kind of a drawback there. So there's a lot of useless characters that you may not even want to use. But the thing is, if you're trying to go for achievements, those useless characters are going to have to be put in a party. You're going to have to compensate for their weaknesses, because at the end of the day, you've got to get everybody up to level 70 to get all the achievements. And there are a lot of characters that you're going to end up not liking and having to use because, well, they just suck, but you've got to get them to level 70 and unlock all their bands. Now, unlocking the bands shouldn't be too bad, but it isn't an issue, to say the least. There are some characters that are just kind of garbage. at least from a playthrough or abilities perspective. Maybe not the character themselves, but the actual what they bring to the table is kind of garbage. So there's that. So that's pretty much all the positives and negatives that I can think of as far as this game is concerned. I think the two big negatives of it being just too long and the user interface missions, those two negatives really do bring the game down substantially, especially compared to the 3D remake of Final Fantasy IV on Steam that you can get. And so it definitely cannot be held in the same level of, comparatively speaking, that one is not as good as that. So from that perspective, I'd say the game itself is probably about an 80. And it maybe even go as low as 75, but I'm going to say 80. So not as good as the 3D remake of Final Fantasy IV on Steam, because I actually enjoyed playing that one a lot more than I did this one, because it was just very fast to get through everything, not counting all the achievement grinding that you had to do. But outside of that, it's a good game. And if you are a fan of the original Final Fantasy IV, I think you will enjoy playing this game again and getting to experience using the same characters again and their kids. And from that perspective, it's actually a pretty good game. I think definitely something I would recommend to fans of the original Final Fantasy IV. If you liked the original Final Fantasy IV, especially if you like the 3D remake of Final Fantasy IV, then I think this game is definitely something that's up your alley and should be something that you should consider giving a try. So anyway, that's basically my thoughts on the game. Outside of the Pixel remasters, this is the only way you're going to get to play this version of Final Fantasy IV, the after years. It was released on the PSP as well, obviously the WiiWare release, but those versions are really hard to come by and not very easily obtained by most players today. So I believe that this version of the game is really the only version of the game that's available to people, and for that reason alone, I definitely do recommend it. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the game. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.